Yeah. Good morning and welcome to the Washington State University Board of Regents meeting. This is the start of our 2 days together. This is always an important meeting because it's the last one of our 2024 year, and we want to begin this meeting by acknowledging that WSU's locations statewide are on the homelands of Native peoples who have lived in this region from time immemorial. The university expresses its deepest respect for and gratitude toward these original and current caretakers. We are inviting members of the public to provide feedback. We are also ensuring that members of the public can tune in on our YouTube live stream. A link to the live stream is available on the WSU Board of Regents website. I want to highlight that our meetings in September, Regent Committee meetings will span over 2 days, starting today and then concluding tomorrow. And the Board of Regents regular meeting will start on Friday following the conclusion of the Strategic and Operational Excellence Committee. The topics we are addressing at this time require more time for thoughtful discussion and deliberation. So while I do attempt to keep us on schedule and ensure that we are moving from each of our committee meetings as planned, we often are engaged in a lively discussion, and we want to ensure that there's space for everyone to fully participate. So we will try as best we can to stay on our targeted timeline, but do believe that this year in particular, there is so much that the board is working with our senior leadership team on that we need the time and space to spend in dialogue and conversation. We've also chosen to change our format, which I appreciate our student Regent Vogel's discussion with us around the importance of public comment at the beginning of a meeting in order to ensure that that public comment helps us to do our part in the decision making with the benefit of hearing public comment before those decisions are made. And so you will see a shift in that format for tomorrow, one that we would like to continue to move forward. So folks that are interested in making public comment to the board, we ask that you go ahead and sign up so that you can be on our list to make sure that we hear from you. And that public comment period will be at the beginning of the Board of Regents meeting on Friday, November 15th. You can do so by filling out the online form found at regents.wsu.edu or emailing regents@wsu.edu. Public comments will be available to be made in person here in Seattle or virtually. So please go ahead and let us know if you're interested in making a public comment by 5 p.m. today. The Regents will now hold an executive session to discuss litigation or potential litigation in real estate and the performance of a public employee. This session will be closed and the executive session will conclude at approximately 9 a.m. unless it's extended by further announcement. If any action is taken as a result of these discussions, it'll be taken later today in open session. It'll be taken actually tomorrow during open session. At this time, I would ask everyone except legal counsel to please leave the room. executive session for 15 minutes. So we will commence our board meeting at 9:15. Okay, so we have concluded our executive session and we will start our Academic and Student Affairs Committee meeting in 5 minutes. We're gonna allow folks to go ahead and come in the room to join us and get settled. So we will be back at, let's say, 9:25.
The bell's good.
All right, good morning. We are convening as the Board of Regents in open session, and I will pass the meeting over to our committee chair for the Academic and Student Affairs Committee, Regent Peacock.
Thank you, Chair Shower, and welcome everyone to our committee meeting for Academic and Student Affairs. And we've got this morning 3 information items and 1 action item. So to get started, I'd like to invite Assistant Vice Provost for Academic Engagement, Cliff Stratton, who is here this morning. And Cliff is going to present the first information item on faculty investment in the Pullman and Vancouver classrooms core to career. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you to the Board of Regents for allowing me the time today to tell you about one effort to help our undergraduate students, no matter their chosen field of study and no matter their social capital, to become career ready. I currently serve as Assistant Vice Provost for Academic Engagement. I'm an Associate Professor in the Department of History. But in a previous role as Director of University Common Requirements, which is WSU's general education program, I had the distinct opportunity of creating and implementing a professional development in teaching initiative for faculty that focuses on growing students' career readiness. Core to Career is now in its 4th year and has reached thousands of undergraduate students and helped them establish habits and ways of approaching their academic work that helps them prepare for post-graduation professional life beginning in their first semester at WSU. Okay, I'm going to start with the why, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how it works. The origins of this program were both serendipitous and intentional. In 2019, which was my first year as Director of U4, my colleague Carl Hauser, a WSU alum, and he retired from the School of Engineering and Computer Science. And Dr. Hauser had long served on the General Education Committee, and upon retirement made a financial contribution to the UCORP program. And he had one term for his gift, and it was do something that makes the value of general education immediately apparent to students. Over the next year, with some not so insignificant interruption from the COVID-19 pandemic, we set about researching and building an initiative that would meet this goal. And one thing that Dr. Hauser was certainly aware of was that with the increased pressure to get into a major that will eventually make their time and financial investments in higher education pay off, with a good paying job, presumably, students very often view general education, which is the breadth part of their learning and their bachelor's degree, as a set of boxes to check on the way to the good stuff, the major program of study that would yield those future earnings and help them establish the kind of secure and upwardly mobile life they seek. What most students fail to see, and what many faculty fail to convincingly articulate and demonstrate to skeptical students, is that general education is indeed the very place to begin to cultivate career readiness that translates into all kinds of future professional and life pursuits. So what we began building in 2019, and what we finally launched in 2021 was part of a national movement among colleges and universities to increase students' awareness and acceptance of the fact that it's the entirety of the college experience, not just academic credits earned in the major, and certainly not just a respectable GPA that prepares them for career. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the students are telling us. Despite some students' dismissal of general education as a space in which to prepare for a career, most students see colleges and faculty as places and people that should help them set and prepare to achieve professional goals. The results of an internal survey, which you can see on the right, of undergraduates last academic year was well aligned with national statistics about how students perceive the role of colleges and universities in preparing for career. You can note the Inside Higher Ed survey on the left, in which students say faculty should play an active role in preparing them for career. What our colleagues in the Academic Success and Career Center at WSU tell us is that too often when students come into the Career Center for coaching, resume work, internship pursuits, they rarely consider the work they've done in courses as worthy of putting on a resume or talking about with a hiring manager as evidence of their readiness. Board of Career is designed to help faculty change that perspective from the inside. In addition, the general education awareness gap that Dr. Hauser identified and wanted to remedy, Board of Career aims to help close the skills gap too. Among the skills you see here, employers only reported a small gap between student preparedness and a skill's importance for one skill, and that was utilizing technology and digital media platforms. I would have wanted the surveyors in this study to add the word responsible utilization of technology and digital media platforms, but regardless, on the essential career skills of critical and creative thinking, communication, adaptability, data analysis, working with people of different backgrounds, the other things that you see up here, employers see lots of room for improvement. So this is where Board of Career comes in, and I'll talk more specifically about the nuts and bolts of the program. The program's learning outcomes, which you can see here, are designed to help faculty unearth in their existing courses ways in which they're likely already helping students develop career readiness, and to make those activities, those assignments and experiences more transparently about skill building, and allow students the time, space, structured reflection, and formative feedback needed to practice and build confidence in communicating the skill sets that they're developing. Talk a little bit about the organization of the program curriculum. Board of Career is organized by 8 career readiness competencies identified by the National Association of Colleges and Employers as essential markers of a career-ready college graduate. This is a national organization, if you're unfamiliar, devoted to assisting colleges and universities prepare students for workforce readiness. If you know your 7 WSU learning goals of undergraduate education, you may notice that 3 of these career competencies are either closely or precisely aligned: critical thinking, communication, and equity and inclusion. Board of Career is designed not only to help faculty help students make those connections to our institutional learning outcomes and their future careers, but also to build capacity in these additional career skills of teamwork, leadership, professionalism, and so forth. So in practice, this looks like for faculty, it's a cohort-based model. We typically bring in, we've had anywhere from 10 faculty at a time to last year, we had a cohort of 20 faculty in Pullman, plus a cohort of about 12 in Vancouver. That was our largest set of faculty. It typically looks like an onboarding session around late August as the fall semester is starting. In that session, faculty reflect on their own career skills that they're using in their lives, not just in their teaching, but in their service to the university, in their scholarship, in their life and their professional organizations. And then they explore existing approaches to teaching that are probably already about career readiness, but are likely not being communicated to students as clearly as they could be. We have 6 90-minute bi-weekly workshops throughout the semester. They tend to be focused on 1, no more than 2 career competencies for each session. And we invite faculty experts from within WSU to lead and facilitate these sessions. And some of our Board of Career Fellows will experiment with strategies during fall semester, but what we ask them to do by the end of the semester is to develop and submit a course revision plan, implement that plan in the spring, and collect data, either quantitative or qualitative, over the course of that first semester, and report back how it went at the end of the academic year. We've had faculty make relatively small shifts in how they talk about or implement assignments and activities, shifting their language toward that of accumulating experiences and artifacts that showcase students' career readiness. And these have had significant payoffs for faculty in both engagement and participation. Other faculty have undertaken more radical changes to their course design that's really upended for the better traditional ways of conveying course material that previously lacked that value added element for students, particularly if they were taking the course outside of their major, which is often the case in general education. Quarter careers help faculty better answer the too often asked question, why do I have to take this class? The more faculty we reach, and by extension, the more students we impact, the less we think students will ask this question. Instead, they'll come to expect a value-added experience that includes building career readiness capacity with each passing semester. Okay, I want to wrap up with a little bit about results and future here. To date, 51 faculty have completed quarter career on the Pullman and Vancouver campuses combined. We have another 13 faculty in Pullman and 8 in Vancouver who are nearing completion at the end of this semester. At least our workshop series part, they'll implement their plans in the spring. So we'll soon have over 70 faculty who have completed the program. We have close to 9,000 undergraduate students who have been impacted by the program. That is, they've taken a course from at least one quarter career faculty member after they've completed the program. And the efforts of our first 2 cohorts in Pullman anyway, these are the numbers that we've run, have resulted in 2% greater retention when compared to students taking a UCOR course from a non-quarter career faculty. So.
But you don't know if that 2% was there before the faculty.
We haven't tested that yet. No, absolutely not. So we think that we've got some real promise here as it relates to retention. We're really excited to look at our retention data after the conclusion of the fall 2024 semester, which will include our 3rd Pullman cohort from last year and our 1st Vancouver cohort from last year. I think more importantly though, for our faculty, and we could think about faculty retention here in addition to student retention, they're finding value in sharing ideas with each other. The faculty that you see up here and all of the cohorts that come through quarter career are multidisciplinary. They're drawn from multiple colleges at the university. They're trying new approaches to teaching. They're enjoying increased satisfaction with teaching general education, which can often be seen, not always seen as a chore. And they have new tools in their teaching toolkit on which to draw when challenges arise, no matter the course that they're teaching, whether it's in UCOR or not. So, goals and growth. We're in our 4th year and we are looking forward to sustainable growth. One of my primary responsibilities over the next year is to secure a sustainable funding model. Again, we started with a gift and some matching funding from the Office of the Provost. We want that to be capable of not only continuing our current efforts, but to expand work with colleges, departments, and to our other campuses outside of Pullman and Vancouver to build capacity to integrate career readiness more transparently and more intentionally into not just individual courses with individual faculty, but into curriculum as well, including the use of professional portfolios, which many of our core career colleagues have experimented with and are eager to figure out how they can scale up within the programs in which they teach. I'm excited about possibilities of our institution's renewed partnership with Adobe on this front. We aspire to become a national model for what I'll call affordable, responsible, and necessary curricular transformation. And to reach a point in the future where every WSU undergraduate student, beginning in their 1st year, not waiting till their senior year, builds sustained recognition, not of the value of the diploma, but of the value of the skills that will not only earn them that diploma, but prepare them for the next stages of learning and growth. Thank you all.
Good work. So questions? Yes.
Okay, so my question is, as you go through this, how often do you tap into industry where a lot of our students, go once they graduate, like Boeing and some of the others?
we have tended to leave that to the faculty who come through the program to determine whether or not that is something they want to build into their students' experiences.
Well, I'm not thinking about it as a student experience per se. I'm thinking about as, you know, as part of your data collection. But I think, you know, if you could start a baseline at some point and just say, okay, just pick up cohort of companies large and small, and then track it to see, well, first of all, they can probably give you some feedback on what they see. I mean, over the years that I was in the science and technology area, one of the biggest challenges that employers said that students had when they graduated is they couldn't write well, they couldn't communicate well.
I just had a
so-
conversation at the airport about this with a
Okay.
colleague in physics.
Yeah, so, so some of those things and just try to look and add it over time.
Mhm.
And just see if there's improvement or if other things arise that we need to maybe focus on. But
Yeah,
I think it's a great.
I mean, we do
program.
have the national data that AACU and NACE provide us. They're always out, you know, working with
Sure.
employers.
Well, that's true, but we want to
Yeah.
know what we're doing.
Right, I know.
Yeah, so
I know.
I think that's
Yeah,
great.
That's great.
I'm glad you're
Great
doing this.
suggestion.
First of all, I'd like to compliment you on your presentation. That was awesome,
Thank you.
inspiring. And I really, love the career-ready metrics. That's, well articulated and very clear. My question is, do people, leave the university understanding that they will always have a report card throughout their career? And this notion of accountability and performance overall, I wasn't quite sure if that was captured in your skills
Mhm.
inventory. But you know, I think it's helpful for us to just communicate very clearly that level of accountability will be with you throughout your entire career, whether you're a startup or a corporate person or academia. So anyway, just a comment.
Yeah, it shows up when we talk with faculty about how to incorporate professionalism into their courses. It does show up there, being accountable. When we talk about teamwork, it shows up there, being accountable to your, in this case, your fellow classmates who you might be working on a project with. And so it does show up, but this helps me think about how we could make that more explicit in the next time we offer it.
Marty,
So I appreciate the report too. I kind of almost think the title of it should be Why Core to Relevant Career. Curriculum the relevancy is really important. And sometimes I candidly feel like higher ed is perhaps in a bit of a bubble on what they believe is relevant versus what the actual application and employer is trying to do. But with Jen's question and even Laura's, I think there are soft skills that I think institutions are very, very good at the hard skills and do an amazing job in those. But in today's world, what separates success for an individual in an organization is their soft skills. You can be the smartest person in the room and the stupidest one at the same time. And I intend to write a book on that someday. And that sometimes can be a bit of a barrier with higher ed if the smartest is not reading and understanding. So, I love that 70 faculty has completed this, but that isn't enough. And I would love to see some additional soft skill components in there of collaboration, coordination, how you land and how you are reading a room. And then all of that is really tied into your written skills because, when I hire interns and I have 7 of them currently, 3 of which are WSU interns and they're fabulous. But boy, you might as well be reading a text message on an email string. So it is a significant skill.
Can I just ask when you said professional? So what's taught there? Right? And maybe that goes to the soft skills. I mean, what is that?
Well, what we attempt to get faculty to do is to investigate where in their courses they could reframe some of their policies, some of their expectations for the classroom in terms of professionalism. So I mentioned teamwork earlier. How do you show up to a project, right? What are getting students to think about this intentionally before they get into a project situation? Particularly our first and second year students who maybe don't have that much experience with this. Our seniors are more seasoned in that regard. We also encourage faculty who maybe don't have many expectations for professionalism or very loose ones to think about whether that is helping or hurting their students, right? And in many ways, giving students the opportunity to reflect on their professionalism, how they're changing, growing, realizing what it means to be a professional, in this case, a professional student, but then thinking about how that translates beyond their undergraduate experience. It really varies by faculty member. We've had faculty simply reframe their attendance policy and their participation policy as professionalism. Showing up, having students reflect on that periodically throughout the semester in a written reflection, even give themselves a grade on it. We find some students grade themselves more harshly than the faculty member might in that regard. But getting students to really think about the classroom experience as a professional setting, and not something they simply have to go to, because they don't have to go at this point, right? We don't have any truant officers, so it shows up in many ways like that. And then in other ways, it might be on a kind of finished product that a team of students or an individual student might complete a presentation, things like that. But really we want it sort of infused throughout the experience of being a student, that is practice for professional life.
Okay, anyone else?
Thank you.
Thank you very
Good
much.
luck
Thank you
with
all.
your funding issue. When you start something with a gift, that's right. So do you have a plan?
Gonna work on it.
Yeah. Good luck, nice report.
Thanks.
All right, we have a second informational item. And I'm gonna invite WSU Pullman Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Ramondo Nash, to present student core topic. Welcome, good morning.
Thank you for giving me a chance to be here today to talk a little bit about our student care network. I'm going to give you what we say on the website, and then we'll talk about the real of everything. But WSU's Student Care Network supports student success across the system through access to resources and early intervention. Each WSU location has a designated student care team comprised of professionals who can recommend appropriate resources and services to help students succeed. And so the reality of this program is really it's about retention and it's about early intervention. And so Pullman serves both Pullman and Global. Vancouver, Tri-Cities, Spokane, and Everett have dedicated staff that's on their campuses to do this work. Each campus uses a database system that we call Maxi. And so that helps us track submissions and gives us the means to make sure that we're tracking the contact that happens with the students, as well as any next steps that we're trying to put in place. Cases can be individual students or it can be impacted communities. And so we actually reach out if there's a wildfire. We'll reach out to students that may be impacted by a wildfire or a flood or those sorts of pieces as well. This also helps us to make sure that we're in compliance with the Here We Law legislation that was passed as well. So that's a structured sort of notion. Some data for you all. These have been our cases from academic year 23, 24, and we're currently in 25. Overall, we're receiving about the same number of overall cases from a Pullman perspective, but there has been a significant increase in medical hospitalizations as well as mental health concerns that have popped up. And I would say that's quite likely across the system as well. These cases are often very complex and require a great deal of time with the student to help support their needs. The hospitalization piece, matter of fact, we've begun to have that increasing, we think, due to a discharge resources that were put in place. So when a student has been hospitalized and they're about to be discharged from the hospital, we do direct contact with that student to try to help them kind of reintroduce into the institution and try to provide for them whatever supports they may need to make that reintroduction successful. As you can imagine, that's a broad range of things that then requires a considerable amount of staff time as well as sometimes a considerable amount of resources. But it's all about helping that student come back in and continue to be successful. Many financial needs, to no surprise, I'm sure is what pops up. For us in particular now, it's cost of housing, both on and off campus. That really seems to pop up the most as well. As we think about moving forward, there's a few things that we've begun to try to put in place to really dive into some of these pieces. And so we're now working on trying to make sure that we're identifying students with housing balances between about 1,000 and 2,000 who's exhausted their student loans. What we do there then is we try to make sure that they're able to enroll for spring semester. And so we're working with partners to create a direct payment from housing grant funds that we have to help reduce their balances to below 1,000. That will then enable them to at least register for their classes. This year, case managers are also working to contact students by phone whenever possible. And so the way that the system works is it's a simple referral. Students can refer, faculty can refer, staff can refer, but we're trying to take it that next step as well and actually initiating initial outreach. So we send a letter, that's your first step. We're now trying to go beyond that letter and do actual phone calls. So we've had several phone conversations with students and have a higher engagement with the students who have answered the calls in most cases. Usually we're able to answer the students' questions more efficiently, and we've begun to reduce the amount of time it takes for them to connect with someone from the student care team while trying this approach. New approach, and so we're looking forward to having better data around just the overall evaluation and outcome pieces for this approach. But again, as you can imagine, it takes time to do these sorts of pieces. Trend-wise, from a Pullman Global, I talked a little bit about that. It's about the hospitalization piece, and the hospitalization is really big Pullman campus in particular because we have the student health center and we have counseling and those sorts of pieces. So there's things that we can do there. Tri-Cities, it's mental health, personal tragedy, and basic needs that are more prominent in terms of their referral cases. In Spokane, we're seeing an uptick in basic needs as well, and you'll hear that as a theme in probably any student-focused presentation that's done. Basic needs, when we talk about housing insecurity, food insecurity, and just day-to-day sorts of pieces, the need for our students is on a significant increase. In Vancouver, basic needs, as well as some classroom management needs and clear communication around classroom expectations is what's popped up there, as well as an increase in mental health referrals. And in Everett, your same sort of notions, but one that's a little bit different is they've received some suicidal ideation and the notion of students needing emergency. Our support mechanism are these teams, right, that reach out. And this team works very close together. We actually hosted a summer retreat for all of the campuses on the Pullman campus to really talk through best practices and connect with our contact in the legislature and those sorts of pieces around ways that we can continue to support our students, but also ways that we can continue to support each other. As you can imagine, doing this work is hard and trying at times, and sometimes you just need to sit there and talk it out with individuals that understand what it takes to do this type of work. We try to make sure across the board that we're approaching things from a holistic perspective. And so we make sure that we're utilizing the campus resources that we may have, but we're also trying to connect students to any community resources that are available to us as well. And so really trying to do it from a holistic sort of perspective. Lots of positives that have happened across the system in terms of our expansion around basic needs. Each campus now has a basic needs coordinator who has been very instrumental in particularly in helping us figure out any community resources that we can now connect students to as well. As you all know, our resources internally are finite. And so the more that we can partner, build relationships and be collaborative, the more we'll be able to provide for our students. And that's become really key for us as well. I'll stop there and just take questions that anyone may have, but I want you to think of this as early intervention, and I want you to think of this as retention. And I want you to think of this as a small group of people carrying large work on their shoulders, because that's really what it is.
Well, this sounds great, and I'm glad that you all are doing this across the system. How does what we see compare to other universities, particularly, whether in-state or out-of-state, sort of peers?
Yeah, we're not seeing anything different. What may change is, so our top four that we see the most consistently are academic, mental health concerns, hospital medical, and financial concerns. I think we can likely go to just about any institution, and those four are likely the same. The order may be switched, but those four are likely the same.
How about the sheer number of students that need services?
Yeah. I think it's gonna be the same. Every year, there's gonna be a few areas that we see things go up significantly. Mental health, that's been number one in terms of its increase across the nation for probably a decade now. As well as access opportunities. By that, I mean, for us, that's our disability resources. Those are also numbers that fall are always on the charts. And that's, again, not just us. And so there's good and bad in that, right? There's good in that we're not an outlier. There's bad in that we're not seeing this decrease in any way, shape, or form. We're seeing it increase exponentially every year.
What is disability? What are you talking about?
Students requiring services, accessibility services to be able to participate with classes in a way that helps them be successful. It could be note taking, different types of hours, accommodations that are needed for whatever it is that they need.
So if they have, like, say, some type of deficit.
It could be a learning disability, it could be they're deaf. Could be any translation services, it's a lot of those sorts of things.
It all comes out of IDIA, so it's all federally determined categories. And
Yeah, it's all EDA, and we have to.
I appreciate the connection to retention. And please thank the 8 staff for that heavy load. Question about services for faculty and staff in a similar manner. Because your ecosystem is connected and people, teaching need to be as healthy as the people who are students.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, right, and I'll defer that one to Chris as the faculty person.
I'll defer it to Leslie as HR goes up.
Sorry.
It's an HR, that's under the HR infrastructure of
Okay.
the university for employees,
Got it.
This is
Okay.
student-based student.
Okay,
but very similar. There's very similar.
okay.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I think this is great. It's so important that students have these support services because, things happen when you're in college. And so we want to ensure that students are still successful, right? When unexpected things occur to them. I wanted to ask, there are the 8 staff, on the Pullman campus that take care of Pullman Global, but I'm interested in how, when feedback is gathered from students on their experience throughout, the referral process and how, they were cared for. I imagine this network is a lot bigger than just those 8 people. So, how difficult is it to implement change or feedback from students? Sometimes I would assume this complex networking system.
Sure, it depends on the change that they're asking to be implemented. And, there are aspects where we have to follow whatever, the legislature is asking us to do, or whatever HIPAA at times is requiring of us to do. So it depends, not to dodge you or anything, but it depends on what they're asking for. Is that if the request is, our website makes no sense, we can control that one. If the request is something from a medical perspective, isn't working the way that that particular student wants it to work, we can look at it, but that just may need to be how it works. So it depends.
Well, the next item will actually get a little bit into training faculty and staff in some of these areas. Interestingly enough, so we'll have some continuity between items, which is fun at a board meeting, not always the case, but I think that might disappear.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I want to ask something, and I don't know where this fits, but since you're there, I'm gonna throw it at you.
Okay.
Because it deals with students. And after the election, leading up to the election, you hear mass deportations. How are we going to handle that? Have you thought about that? Is there any planning? I don't know what that means as far as, are they come to our campuses or what, or there's sanctuary types of things, but are we thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, from a student perspective, we're having many conversations, I would say, with students. I would say that our care network numbers, this slide was put together much earlier than today. And our numbers are going to go up, in particular, interpersonal conflict. I'm sorry, sure. In particular around mental health and emotional sorts of things. Our numbers will definitively, just based on the last week or so, increase there. We have a lot of staff that are supporting students as best as possible. We have a number of staff that are trying to connect students to resources and those sorts of pieces. From our perspective, it's listening, it's hearing, it's connecting because as much as you can, and it's encouraging too. There's lots of pieces that I think as WSU, there's probably conversations for us to have. But from a student perspective, we'll continue to care and provide support and listen as much as we can. And moving forward, I'm sure that we'll figure out pathways to continue to help them be successful and to continue to provide support.
Yeah, we're gonna move on.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, yes,
I know
sorry.
it's always
Okay.
like, am I actually speaking or trying to move
Yeah.
us along? So I really appreciate the presentation, and I think, Chris, to your point, the building of these presentations has been done brilliantly. So in Cliff's presentation about how we're helping to get folks ready for careers, there's probably an employer perspective. We are having many conversations about how to support mental health in our organization, including trying to think about full-time at 30 hours, which is not the way in which I was professionally raised, that 30 hours is exhausting and I can't work anymore. And I have many WSU grads that are part of our little firm that I think that what I'm curious about is how this translates into that resiliency, because I think that the mental health is a real, I mean, we're naming it, we're talking about it, we're trying to build systems to help support folks. As we transition folks into careers, this is a really key element in addition to how we support employers to be ready for this, because I can say I wasn't ready to kind of even be thinking about, you can't work a full 40 hours because of the mental health, demand that's showing up in the professional workplace. So I'm just curious how, in your mind, kind of the support of students across our system, what that looks like as we help them prepare for their career.
Yeah, one of the pieces that I share with my group all the time, right, is we're here to support students, but we're also here to get in students' way as well. And that's a means of support too, right? We're not here to grab their hand and sing kumbaya and walk with them and do everything for them. We're here to connect them. And if they're struggling and can't figure something out, we're here to answer a question, or we're here to help them navigate. But it's about them learning how to do the things that they need to do, and not about us doing it for them. And it's challenging that, we can tell a student to call, but we're not gonna call for them. We may have to remind that student to call, but again, we're gonna tell them, we're not gonna call for you. And so it's support in a way that's hopefully helping them learn the things that they need to learn to be successful career-wise, life-wise, moving forward.
Okay, just in summary, the 4 buckets again, in order, you said.
In order? Sure.
You said.
Academic,
Yeah,
mental health concerns.
yeah,
Hospital, medical, and financial.
When were those ordered?
And for us, those are ordered, but that, ordered as of a month ago.
What's the
That
difference?
order may have changed
What's the difference between 2 and 3?
between mental health and
Oh,
hospital.
so it's mental
Yeah,
health
it's
by
mental health
itself.
concerns by itself.
Those numbers were just out of those mental health numbers.
Well, and that's the same list at every university. I will say, if the larger your population is at first gen, Pell L, et cetera, the higher it is.
Yeah.
If you go to universities that are predominantly very, very wealthy children, obviously the fiscal starts to, there are changes in that. We have a uniquely challenging population based on what we do.
Yeah, and those 4, as I said, those 4. All the time.
Yeah. Thank you. Good report.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
We're gonna move on, and thank you, Chris. Provost and Executive Vice President Chris Riley Tillman is gonna give us an update on presidential delegated authority items, of which there are 3.
Or 3.
Yes.
And instead of just reading what's here, because anybody can read what's here, I just want to give a quick overview of the 2 different centers and the changes in the faculty manual. And Judy and I will, of course, make our faculty manual jokes, as we always like to make. The first one, C-Teach, is a really nice dovetail with these past conversations. In my previous institution, I was a part of a prevention science group that was essentially what this is, but in that particular iteration, it comes out of a significant amount of trauma-informed care work that has been done at the K-12 level for a number of years. We've realized that has become more and more beneficial as we move into early adulthood and then adulthood, and you have very similar models. We have a really, really nice HDFS department, and the Child and Family Research Unit, which is a nice combination of that department and then extension, has been doing great work for about 25 years. This is a primarily grant-funded entity. I think it's had about $6 million in grant funding over the course of its history, which is pretty significant. What C-Teach will do, and I think that the key line in this is to better educate our workforce on the importance of trauma-informed principles, practices, and mental health and well-being of staff and students. So how do the day-to-day actions that we go through either enhance trauma or minimize trauma? And obviously, even if we go before COVID and a lot of the experiences around that event, this was a pretty significant conversation. It's only become more significant in the conversations that were just brought up about recent elections, et cetera, is going to expand a lot of these conversations, to say the least. So we're really excited about the translation. To me, this is a wonderful example of where you've got an academic research-based center that was a group, a unit that was primarily focused on one college, that is transforming into a center that can leverage that across the entire university. There are other places in the university that do similar types of work, you know, prevention science group, et cetera. This will allow a little less siloing or dovetailing through that particular group. And so I'm also really excited about the alignment here with extension. We'll see how that can be leveraged moving forward. But I think building that into the basis really gives a framework throughout the extension network to expand the impact of that significantly, really across the state of Washington, not just particularly on the campuses. And so any questions on that first, Senator?
I have a quick one.
Yes.
When you say grant funded,
Yes.
like what kind of grant? Federal grant, state grant?
Sure. I mean, it's going to be a mix of either pass-through dollars related to extension, federal grants or state grants. There is a significant amount of federal money, or there's historically been a significant amount of federal money in this particular space. We'll see what occurs going forward, but a mix of all of the above.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Could you just really quick, so I just want to confirm, so this work's been going on at WSU for 25 years? And we're just calling it a center now?
The research work and the work within Connors has been going on for 25 years. With the center, we're calling it a center now, so it's reached the point of where it makes sense to think of it as a center, and they've gone through the process. But the application of it, more broadly speaking, less so. But it's very focused on Connors historically.
Incredible and exciting.
Yeah. Thank you. The second one is much more exciting to talk about today than it would have been 2 weeks ago, because there were some questions 2 weeks ago, and that's the Institute for Northwestern's Energy Futures. We've obviously talked about this an awful lot in one sense or the other, but this is a really nice build out of our energy work and a broad base of areas on the Tri-Cities campus. Many of us were at the opening of the building where this hit. We have moved very quickly based on the recent election into what are we going to do with the faculty positions? Where are they going to be? What are they going to be locating? And rethinking some of those pieces, which we're really excited about. I think the larger piece of this, which is important for the system structure of the university, is that this really does center this work on the Tri-Cities campus. And it, I think, sets up a model that we're going to see more and more going forward of where we want to do the specific type of elite research and elite production. And it's not always coming out of just Spokane if it's medical, or just Pullman if it's other stuff. And so this really centers this and puts I think a flag in the sand or the ground, or whatever you put a flag in, of how we want to think about doing our work across the center, across the system, and leveraging the resources that are associated with it. So we obviously had some support initially for this built into this larger project, and now we've got significant stake. There's obviously a massive amount of either industry or federal, or I mean, the upside on this is beyond belief. And so, any questions on this one? We did this 2 weeks ago, there would have been questions, but luckily that
Because of funding.
that in the right direction. Pardon?
Because of funding.
Because of funding. Yeah. I mean,
The initiative.
we would have figured something out. It's too important not to do, but this is a better pathway situation to be going through. We've got plenty of other things we can figure out the funding on. So, and then finally, faculty manual revisions. As Judy and I have talked about with the board time and time again, faculty manuals are written over decades and decades and decades and built in each other, and they are a bit of a house of cards. This did some significant revisions. You can look at the red lines. It's amazing the amount of actual revisions that you're seeing, things being referred to in the wrong way, misquoting, sending you to links that haven't existed probably as long as I've been in the industry. And so really cleans this up quite well. There's nothing, I don't think there's anything substantive here that is, but it's obviously problematic when people are referred to the wrong way or the wrong person is referenced. It doesn't even exist anymore or something like that.
So who does that work? Who is doing the red?
It's a collaboration. Yeah, it's a collaboration between faculty.
We have a committee of 11 faculty that looks at this. We consult. I talked to Daniel Hess a lot in our policy and governance office. I've worked with Adam Malcolm. I worked with Sean. His last name I'm not going to have off the top of my head. So there's a committee of 11 anybody can propose a revision, and then there's a committee of 11 that reviews the revisions and goes over them. And then whoever's chair right now, I'm chair, reaches out to Danielle and Malcolm and different ones and says, okay, we're looking at this, are we gonna cause any problems do you see anything here that isn't working the way we want it to, that may cause us some problems down the road? One of the recent challenges that Kirk helped us with a lot, the first time I walked in his office and asked about this, was that we have multiple policy documents without a hierarchy in between them. So we're trying real hard to be, if this is a BPPM, we'll just reference the BPPM and not try to block them through our own thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or put a link to it or something like
And,
that.
and as Chris said, I think our intention here was cleanup. It really wasn't to amend a policy or a way we do things. It was just much more to get the right things in the right places and reference or misquote things.
I suspect as long as I'm here, this will essentially be a standing item with either faculty manual revisions or policy revisions. We've got some significant revisions we need to do with a number of our policies to make sure that they are consistent with the actual functioning of our university as it's been for a bit of time. So we'll have some more coming forward next time.
If I could.
Yep.
I think generally, over the last couple of years, we've really, worked to clean up a lot of just policy types of issues. It's not very sexy work, but it's needed. Danielle's been working her way through a series of policies that internally, about every month, we get a new set of things that some of them have been reviewed in a decade or longer. And going through, making sure the language is appropriate, just, good due diligence. And I know Judy has led a lot of this on some of the more academic pieces. And so this has been needed for a long time. And if you don't do it periodically, then something comes up and we get bit in the butt by, and see, I mean, very family friendly. We get bit by somebody going, well, why didn't you look at this anytime in the last 15 years? And so I think
It's good practice.
yeah, I think it's really good practice, and I appreciate the fact that Judy and others want to weigh in on this, because it's not the most interesting work necessarily.
To give a brief plug to WSU, the collaborative approach between the faculty and administration here is atypical in my experience. Usually there's a belief that if anybody wants to change any policy or anything like that, it's some sort of overarching, it's nefarious, and we're trying to do something awful. There's a very, very different mentality here, which has been really refreshing.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Amanda, we're gonna ask you to come back up. We have one action item. It's a revision to our Washington Administrative Code. Come back.
And so we are looking to revise WAC 504-26 standards of conduct for students. The Center for Community Standards is requesting changes to WAC 504-26 for students. The changes are intended to provide additional clarity to students about behavioral expectations and adjudication procedures, and to create a more efficient resolution process while maintaining students' rights. The proposed changes include the emergency changes that were established in August of 24 to ensure we were compliant with the updated Title IX regulations. Significant changes include full adjudicative hearings, academic integrity, as well as more clarity, edited for clarity, and additional definition information for existing prohibited contact, and try to remove redundant language. The red line copy that you all saw denoted the changes that were made. We held a public hearing for this rule change on October 8th, 2024 at 4 p.m. And there was no written or verbal comments from the public offered during that session.
Questions? So what drove this? Why did this come up?
We needed to get in compliance with the new Title IX regulations.
It's in it, okay.
Yeah, that was the key.
All right, this will be on the docket tomorrow for action. Thank you. Thank you. That's the end of our report.
We were scheduled to take a break, and we're gonna keep moving forward. If someone needs to excuse themselves, please feel free to do so, but given that I've kept this a little longer in some of these meetings, I'd like for us to keep moving forward. So We're also gonna structure the executive and governance committee just slightly different. We are gonna take a lunch break in the middle of the committee. So we're not gonna start with a break, but we are gonna go ahead and take a lunch break. The 5 information items that we will cover and 1 action item, like I said, will be split between the time that we have between now and noon. So I'd like to go ahead and get started with the first information item, which is the expectations for the Board of Regents. And the board has had the opportunity to see these expectations. I just kind of want to frame this a little bit in that when you step into the role of board chair and you have these ideas about how your term is going to go and then life happens, there are kind of housekeeping things, just like faculty manual updates that maybe were started but just haven't been finalized. And so I'm taking this work, which you saw at the last executive and governance meeting, that we had a little bit of work there that Regent Dickinson started as board chair. This is another one of those elements that Regent Dickinson started as board chair. And as my time gets near the end, I'm trying to wrap up a few of these. So this is pretty standard expectation for board members. Definitions around fiduciary duties, duty of care, ethics, conflict of interest is something that we do each year, which we did at the beginning of this academic year in September. There's training requirements now that are part of what it means to serve as a member of the board. So in addition to giving a lot of your time and being able to sit at this table, which is a privilege, we want to make sure that as we onboard 2 new regents, that our existing regents and our new regents really truly understand what those expectations are. So with that, are there any questions or comments from the board?
Thank you. Yeah, that looked good.
All right. The expectation will be that we'll each sign this and our new board members will also as well.
I'll just add one thing to that. There was discussion, we met about this and Chair Showers asked both Regent Serena and myself to take this another step. And so we've looked at it from the standpoint of, as mentioned, there's really kind of 3 buckets, but the one that we really debated or talked about was, should it be a policy or should it be a guideline with regard to that expectations that we all sign? And feeling was that this should be a guideline, and that it didn't have to be a policy. So you will do this as opposed to a very clear, very laid out list of guidelines. And so that's what the intent is around those expectations, conflict of interest. And then just to put your head back for those of us who were at that retreat in Vancouver, I think where we had the conversation about community agreement, that document that then we discussed, I think last in September. Yeah. So and it's timely because of the 2 new regents who will be coming on and our addition of Cassandra.
Question. So you said this is a guideline, it's not a policy? Is that what you just said? Or did I misunderstand?
It has been a guideline, so nothing's changed.
Okay,
It's not a formal policy. That's what the discussion was
and
around.
I guess, I mean, some of these things, particularly things like conflict of interest and so forth, I look at that as policy. As opposed to, I mean, a guideline, maybe it's the definition of guideline. Guideline to me is much more, it's a suggestion. So I don't, that would be my only.
Conflict of interest statement, as I understand it, that's a separate statement that we sign. And I don't know if it's a policy, or maybe Nathan can help us on that.
Nathan, do you want to join us? I think what this is really also referencing is it's building out the RWs, which is policy. And so the clarity of what our definitions of fiduciary responsibilities and how those show up in the way in which we all show up was the clarification that we wanted to put in place.
Yeah, so when I reviewed the document, I agree with you that there are definitely policies contained in the guidelines that the regions are bound either by law or common law or statutes to follow. So there are definitely requirements that are included in those guidelines that are separate and outside of the guidelines. There are also pieces of that guidelines that are just after guidelines. And if you use them as guidelines, you know, they're not mandatory. They're just a community expectation of the board that their fellow community members will follow, but there's no.
So for example, training would be a guideline.
Well, there's some training by university policy that the regents are required to take. I haven't gone through every single one of the trainings that's listed in this guidelines to trace that back to the requirement to see if it's required or not. So I can't directly answer your question. But I know some of those by university policy are required, like executive policy 15 training and Title IX training is legally required. Without knowing for certain, my guess is most of those trainings are actually required either by law or university policy, but I don't 100% know the answer to that question right now.
But I think the ones that wouldn't be, or like, for example, going to an AGB meeting to learn more about, you know, how effective boards can operate and that kind of stuff. So what should it be? So it's a combination of both. Yeah, should it be a policy or guideline?
Well, if the board chooses to make it a policy, then it'll, you know, obviously that'll have more strength in having regents follow it, because it has more consequence for regents not following university policy that, you know, brings risk to the university, of course.
That was the question.
I guess I would say that if the regents have really reviewed this and are comfortable with making it a policy, and are comfortable that everybody will have the ability and will follow it, it would be stronger as a policy. But I think it would need to be retooled a little bit differently. Right now, it's not. Right now, it's a statement of expectations that you sign. It's not framed. It's not written as a policy. Currently, it's a document. And so if there are expectations that the board wants to place on itself, as a policy, I'd recommend that be a separate process.
Could I also add that there is a challenge with repercussions relative to meeting these expectations and or whether it's a guidance or a policy. So for instance, if this time next year, I don't do the training, I don't know that Regent Ramos, as the board chair, has any ability to create a penalty for me because I didn't do the training. It's a violation of policy or guidelines. It's a violation of university policy, but other than the governor removing me, there's not recourse for the board chair or the board.
There's censure.
There's censure.
Yeah.
I mean, I just sort of feel like with some of the things that are in here, they're things you don't want to, they're not suggestions. They're things we really need to do to be effective board members. So that's sort of where I'm coming from, but.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of those are already, those requirements are housed elsewhere already. So whether or not this document is a policy or guideline, or whether or not you adopt it at all, those will still remain independent of this document.
You know, when I came on the board and saw those expectations, it was very clear to me, this is what you do, right? And this has been the practice and it's understood and you sign it. To Lisa's point, what if I don't? And what, and
We'll
so,
stick Tracy or Emily on you. But I think we, huh? Yeah. Well, I've said my piece, so.
Are you suggesting that maybe this become a policy so it's a little bit stronger?
Well, I sort of, I sort of sort of feel like maybe we just need to think about, right now it is a guideline, and Nathan said that there's some pieces. I just want to make sure that the pieces that are key and critical are indeed under. I just don't want it to look like a suggestion that we can have conflicts of interest or that type of stuff. That's,
yes.
and I realize we have a conflict of interest statement
Yeah.
as an example. But, that's my only concern. I just want to make sure that the key elements are covered by a, this is your job. And, these are things you must do.
Yeah, I have, like, this document was created by, I think it was originally created by Danielle, in her current role, in policy and governance. I've seen the document, but I have not, been asked to go through the document and separate what's required and what is not required absent this document. So I'm personally not prepared to
Yeah.
answer that question for you about what pieces of this are already required from another source and which are not. I'd be happy to do that work, but I just haven't.
Well, I mean, I think we do need to move this forward because, we got new regions coming on. So, I mean, you sort of heard my concern. So I just think maybe we could continue it as a guideline, but look in the future as to whether there are elements of this which should be included, whether this whole document should be a policy or if we need to.
Separate them out and
Yeah.
identify them as policy.
Or just reference other documents or
Yeah.
something, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm happy to, I know.
But I'm happy to move it forward now.
For Regent, yeah, sorry, I know Regent Pika and Regent Cerna have been working on this issue. I'm happy to take this offline and partner with them to.
Sure.
For
That
that.
sounds good. Thank you.
Regent Ramos, you have a comment?
Yeah, just to add, I appreciate the clarity of the document. There's an element of this about self-accountability and integrity, and also the culture that we're trying to promote, which is a higher level of expectation that's documented. So, it's a great step forward. And then we can continue to explore whether we need to strengthen it or not.
Okay, excellent. I think this also ties in really nicely, as Regent Pika just mentioned, the work that Regent Pika and Regent Cerna are doing around our more formal onboarding and offboarding process. So we have an onboarding and offboarding of our student regent every year, and we don't have that same pace necessarily for the other seats, but we do have a need to make sure that we have good processes in place that are reflective of our values. So Regent Pika, do you want to add any more context around the onboarding and offboarding?
No, I think you said it all. I mentioned earlier that I had that meeting yesterday with John, the outboarding. I know that, Vicky, you're doing the same with Heather, and I, they appreciated that time, and they were very, John was very, in my case, happy to have that. You spend a lot of time, you've got thoughts. How can we improve what went very well for you? So what was it like being a regent, and the direction that we're headed, thoughts on that? So I think to be really deliberate about that in the process, just as people are coming on. I think even every year as we do this with our student regent representative in Cassandra, for example, just to make sure that all of these, we're giving the benefit to the incoming regents, that they've gotten all of the time they need to help get on board. It's more deliberate and it's more time spent, and I think it's time well spent.
Okay. I think we can probably shift over to our Presidential Search Advisory Committee update. Regent Ramos.
Okay, sure. I would like to first thank Regent Powell, Regent Cerna, Regent Blankenship for all their help from the beginning. Let me just lift this all the way back up to April 19th, when we received the charge from the Board of Regents to begin the process. We activated the website shortly thereafter. We also went through about 8 internal focus groups to begin the drafting of the presidential leadership profile. Concurrent with that, we started to build out the committee. And as you all well know, we activated an application process so that we really heard from the full breadth of the community as to who was interested in being part of the committee. And our committee regents helped to select out of 154 applicants, the 21 additional committee members. With that, we had our onboarding session in August. And we also went to all of our campuses and conducted about 26 public sessions to round out the presidential leadership profile. And in September, Board of Regents approved the profile. We activated it further, and our search consultant partner, Isaacson Miller, had been conducting outreach. And I'll share a data point with you that is some recent insight in that we've reached out to over 250 candidates throughout the academia world. And what we're also finding out is that in top tier research institutions, about 58% of the presidents started in 2020, and another 32% started last year. So we're seeing a large transformation throughout academia. And I just thought to give you that context, there's a significant amount of effort underway. And I'll just say some real, true, and deep thinking that's happening with the committee to find the leader that's going to move us forward. I think it's fair to say that we've tried to create an environment where we can debate, where people can voice their concerns safely, and that everybody understands that, we're looking for the best leader going forward. And so our next steps are to physically meet the top semifinalist candidates and conduct interviews. And then we'll, as a committee, present the top few to the Board of Regents to consider as final candidates. And following that, we will identify, hopefully in January, the candidate and make an announcement. And all of this, I'll just say, has been supported by our philosophy of transparency. We've given updates in the website. I have sent letters to the leadership or the PSAC committee monthly. And yet we also have a very high level of expectation that we're going to maintain confidentiality of our candidates. We've talked about this before, and the reason for confidentiality, which is really to protect the interested parties and to also find the most compelling candidates who are very interested in maintaining a high level of trust in their current institutions. And so, it's a bit of a delicate matter, but we have taken on this philosophy of confidentiality quite rigorously. And I appreciate all of the committee continuing to uphold that integrity. I think that's the end of my report. Any questions?
It's a huge amount of effort to move this forward. We had the opportunity yesterday evening to host a dinner with former regents and hearing some of the former regents share their presidential search kind of processes. I've spent time, and I know Regent Ramos has, talking to other institutions that are currently recruiting, some in the state and some outside the state. And our process is longer. It is more inclusive than the other processes that are really looking at a several month a recruitment interview and announcement with a much smaller group of folks. So navigating 25 on a committee is no easy task, and ensuring that there's space for everyone to fully participate requires extra time. So I do want to just continue to thank the regents that are serving on this committee. It's a lot of time, and I think it's really reflective of the way in which we think about how we are activating our land grant mission, access, transparency, and inclusion. So thank you for
I
that.
would just add too, in addition to all of those pieces that Regent Kika and I were tasked with, reaching out to donors and prior regents and business community members. And I think between the two of us, we were in contact and have assembled feedback around what they are looking for in the future president of WSU, to the tune of probably, I think over 40 people.
We'll add that to the 500 that we met during public session. Yeah, sorry.
I just want to say thank you to Regent Ramos for guiding all of this, because it's a tremendous effort that she has put in many hours, and really helped to keep us together and guiding us. So thanks for your effort.
Ditto.
Yeah.
Find that good leader.
I also just wanted to mention that Regent Blankenship couldn't be here in person today, but has joined via Zoom for this portion of our meeting. And then as we move to the next exciting topic that we're looking forward to bringing up a few other folks to talk about, if there's no other comments or questions around the presidential search process. Okay, all right, the next item on our agenda is our One WSU initiative. I'd like to invite President Schultz, Executive Vice President for Finance and Administration, and Chief Financial Officer Leslie Brunelli, Spokane Chancellor and Executive Vice President Daryl DeWald, and Provost and Executive Vice President Chris Riley-Tillman to present the next topic. This kind of dream team actually has been making the rounds with town halls that have been really successful from my perspective, that just caught when I am able to just tap in and listen to those presentations. Really appreciate this team and the way in which we'll be able to set up this conversation with a few slides and a lot of good conversation and dialogue. So I'll pass it over to you, President Schultz.
Great. Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to spend a little time on this particular topic. So I have about 10 slides. I want to move through these really quickly, and really want to invite the board to engage with us in a discussion around like where One WSU is, answer some questions, hear some concerns, and really hopefully, let me just go to the next slide. So what do we want to do? One, I want to provide a little bit of history and a current evaluation of where we are in the One WSU initiative. So just a little look backwards. I think that's always helpful. Second, identify areas where the board would like more information. A lot of times when this comes up, we'll hear people go, well, I don't really understand what it is, or where the initiative's going, or why we're doing it. So I rather than these single individual conversations sometimes we think it's really important to be able to have that, open format with the board and the senior most leadership team, and our chancellors are also in the room here as part of this as well. And then third, and this is really important, one, I can guarantee you that virtually all of the presidential finalists will watch whatever this session is right now to sort of see how the board is talking about this, what kind of questions and things are there. And we want to come out of this session, or at least put ourselves in a position so the Board of Regents feel that they can serve as advocates for One WSU moving forward. It doesn't mean everybody agrees with every part of it, but then people go, hey, this makes sense, we're on board, it's a long process, and we want to be in there together. So these are really the three things that we want to get out of this time today. So a little bit of history of the WSU system, founded in 1890. You all know that. Our other campuses that were originally termed branch campuses in Vancouver, Tri-Cities, and Spokane have only been around since 1989. And one of the things when Chris got here that he's continued to remind us is, 35 years of campus developing is not very long, considering that a lot of campuses are much, much older than that. I think sometimes we want to snap our fingers, we start something and immediately everything is super smooth and it operates the way we would like to. Nothing ever works that easily. When we were looking back at what we might want to do here with one WSU moving forward and how do we optimize the whole system, we found a report in a file from 2004 that came and basically was a group of folks that got together and said, boy, you know, the system stuff needs some work. There needs to be clearer reporting lines. It's not clear who does what. And one of the conclusions in that report was, boy, this has got some political baggage with it, and probably nobody's going to want to address it right now. So guess what happened? That report got shelved, and very little kind of happened. WSU Everett has only been around since 2014, medical school in 2015, and then around that time, under direction of the board and some frustrations, if you will, between, you know, with deans, with chancellors and others, we really need to go back, look at executive policy number 29 about how the system's going to work. And so Chip Hunter, who is dean of the the Carson College of Business, put together a small group at our behest to have a report with some recommendations on how we might want to move forward. And so that was very comprehensive. Some parts of that we thought were great. Some parts of that probably we didn't agree with as much, but that was okay. It wasn't meant to be, here's an exact roadmap. But we adopted an awful lot of things that were listed in there. And then 2022, new administrative structure, putting in place a Pullman chancellor for the first time. So you see all this out there, and I just want to stress moving forward that some of the challenges we're dealing with now are no different than when the other campuses were first put in place in 1989. We're evolving, and I think it means there's not a day we're going to check it and say everything's perfect. But I don't want struggle sounds negative. I think we have had debate around a lot of issues on what WSU needs to look like moving forward before. So what we did is put together with the four of us, what are some of the strengths of the system today as we see it? A strong commitment to the land grant mission. You hear that, you all heard that in your listening sessions you did. Faculty, staff, and students across the system talk about this is a core part of what WSU does. Geographically dispersed, presence in every county. You sort of see the map up there. I mean, we are all over the state. University of Washington would love to have the presence in all the counties in the state the way we have through extension and campuses and research and extension centers. Very strong, that we need to be singly accredited, that we have one degree. Doesn't matter which campus you go to, you are a graduate of Washington State University. And we've heard this strongly from our faculty, from our staff, and our students consistently over time. We say strong Cougar community. We all take pride in the Go Cougs part of anywhere you are around the world. You meet people, if you've got a logo line, you have an interesting conversation. Not every university has that. And I think it's a particular point of pride for WSU. It's very characteristic of land grant institutions who have a lot of first generation students who come and people who feel this place made a difference in my community. As you get to second and third, maybe generational wealth, where people come from different background, you don't have that at some of the universities that may attract a different set of students. It's not a better or worse thing as much as I think it's something we take pride in. We also offer our healthcare programs statewide. We've got nursing and multiple locations, multiple campuses. The College of Medicine wasn't all just in Spokane. First couple of years there, but again, the statewide presence, that's part of our culture, and that's something that we do. And we think these are all real strengths. What are some challenges? Tension between campuses and colleges. And I think this is just inherent. You're going to have that. We hire great A-type personality, men and women who want to lead and they want to do great things. And there's always going to be some conflicts over who's in charge and where does budget lines flow and things like that. This will never be eliminated, but we can certainly make sure that it doesn't work to the detriment of what we're able to do with students, faculty, and staff in serving our land grant mission. There certainly are redundancies between campuses, and sometimes we say redundancies, we can take that as a negative. there are reasons to have the same degree programs at a bunch of locations because workforce needs are there and it's needed. But there's sometimes redundancies in some of the backroom operational pieces and things like that. And this is, you know, if you've got it locally, you want to tend to keep it locally, even if you can't afford it. And so these are the types of things that I think will continue to be part of our optimization efforts. You know, there's a national, regional perception of academics at WSU. You know, Chris came in and he's talked about, hey, this is a great place and we have a lot to be proud of. Interestingly, when we were driving up to Everett yesterday, one of the things that is unique about WSU is we have a large percentage of our faculty and staff who've never worked anywhere else. And compared to the other land grant institutions I worked at and where I went to school that had a much broader set of faculty and staff that some had been to 3 or 4 different institutions in their career, we tend to have a lot of folks, and this, you know, it's not a negative, but that have seen one place. And so you tend to see our strengths and weaknesses through a different lens than if you've been 4 places and go, hey, this is pretty unique and pretty great. This is a challenge. Ambiguity around academic roles at each campus location. We're going to continue to struggle with this, and this is just all part of, you know, what's out there. So we think this articulates a little bit of some of the challenges that we have. So we have some real strengths on WSU. We got some challenges moving ahead. The mix of centralized and decentralized systems. Yeah, I can't even read my own slides. Thank you. And, you know, it's interesting. People tend to look upon this sometimes in a polar thing. It's everything should be centralized or everything should be decentralized. And the fact of the matter is there are some things that makes great, perfect sense to have one unit across the system that's doing a bunch of stuff and everybody can tap into it regardless of where that physical location is. There are some things that need to be decentralized and available on each particular campus. But the way we've done it largely has been very organic. It's not been planned. If you had money, you were able to do it. If you didn't have money, you weren't able to do it. And so you get these really disparate offices and units somewhere that if you were going to start over from scratch, you would probably do it in a different way. And so we got to work in that direction. Bringing resources into alignment. You know, Leslie has come on board and really helped us a lot with this, but we had worked for a while when Elizabeth was here on a budget model. And just as we look more thoroughly at what that looked like, it just turns out it was not tenable. It wasn't going to do what we needed to do. It was going to really strip some units completely of dollars. And so rather than put in place something that everybody would look at, particularly in budget and finance, and say, this is not going to work for us, we just place that aside. It doesn't mean that you've thrown it out. We place it aside for now. We need to make sure we're ready for that. Our reporting systems and practices were not sufficient to support a comprehensive budget model. And I think what we don't want to do is jump into something and everybody says, Kirk, if you did this over 3 years, you would have had a successful implementation. By trying to do it too fast, you've really put yourself at risk. And Leslie can talk more about this a little bit later. Over the last 1.5 years, we've really tried to improve transparency of financial information. And I want to talk a little bit about transparency here very quickly, because transparency, sometimes people mean it's like you open up, you know, you're like, okay, here it is. We're finally letting people see it. The WSU budget has been transparent for a long time. But to me, unless you were really a wizard and could go through 1,000 pages of documentation to see where things are, it wasn't transparent from the perspective of it's all here, and here are really good summaries that allows people who got backgrounds in this to be able to look and read and understand what's there, and synopses that Leslie and her team and our chancellors and other people put together that, you know, provide analysis of the data and what we're doing there. So to me, transparency isn't just we're going to open it up and bury you with BS. It is, how do we make sure that we're communicating with rank and file faculty, staff, and students about here's our fiscal position, here's our challenges, here's our strengths. And I give Leslie a great deal of credit for coming in and being able to communicate that in a way that's understandable, digestible to the community at large. We mentioned a year ago that we were doing an administrative and academic program reviews, the term we use. We've switched that to more optimization. I think when people hear review, it's like you're gonna come in with an axe and cut a bunch of stuff overnight. We've really tried to be, we've tried to talk about in our town halls that we want to be thoughtful. We want to move through this deliberatively, which means that even if it's hard, you keep moving, you don't stop. But at the same time, what we don't want to do is rush it in 3 months. Everybody goes, if you took a little more time and did it differently, you get to a better conclusion than trying to rush. And we watched University of West Virginia, or what WVU, kind of go through this in a very national way that just had everybody running for the hills on the way that they conducted that. And we just want to be a little bit smarter. And for example, Sandra Haynes at Tri-Cities, they've been through this for a couple of years. They've right-sized some programs, they've made some stuff smaller, they've chosen things to do, and they've done it collaboratively with faculty and staff. And then level setting financial expectations for our new strategic plan and leadership transitions. This is really important. People always think I got a good idea, and if I can just get to the president, the provost, VP for health sciences, find Leslie in a corner, I can get money to do my thing. And it's important on this level setting that people understand where we are, and that if you're gonna do X, that probably means that we've got to figure out that we're gonna do Y, you know, 0.8 of Y over here to free up resources to do that. It can't all be additive. And that's hard to do institutionally because we have so many good things we want to do. But we have to acknowledge that there's only so much in the way of resources available. This last slide, and then we'll stop here. But if you look, and I don't expect people to read this as an eye chart, but in 2019, if we look at our general structure, like all those boxes reported to the president. And if you go through that, that was international programs, it was finance administration, health sciences, go on. And what we've shifted to in 2024 is really, I think, an alignment of areas. So underneath the provost now, we have international programs, we have research, reports to Chris. And I think faculty had been asking for that in some form or fashion, maybe not directly, but indirectly for a while, that seemed to make sense for the chief academic officer to have those things. When we brought Leslie on board, we moved IT and human resources underneath her portfolio so that it's almost like a chief operating officer type of thing. Those again used to report to the president. And so what I think we've been able to do is not actually add a lot of positions here. There are not a lot of new ones, but what we've done is restructure this in a way that recognizes that we have 3 executive vice presidents, provost and academic affairs, health sciences, and finance and administration, CFO, that really are the key sort of leadership team moving forward, with vice presidents that report to them in portfolios that we think make good strategic sense for WSU. And with that, here's just last slide. We want to continue to our goals, build on our existing strengths, and we have a lot of these, and tackle those identified areas of opportunity. Maintain 1 faculty, 1 accreditation. When we suggested a few years ago, maybe not doing this in that particular way, the faculty response was pretty negative. I think there's a lot of the support to maintain this. How do we use improved tools and data for institutional decision-making and strategic planning? It can't be just a bunch of us getting in a room on a strategic plan. We've got to have data and information, look at trends, understand where we are, do the level setting. That's important. How do we restructure leadership to support system and campus level operations? Our first iteration of the WSU Pullman Chancellor was not well received around campus. People felt we were fostering administrative bloat. We were trying to set up an office that looked just like the ones in Tri-Cities in Vancouver. And I think what we've been able to do under Dave Soleil's status as our interim chancellor is a focus on Pullman. We have taken a lot of the dollars that were going to be used for those additional administrative positions and returned them back to Leslie to be able to use for other areas of the institution. So the chancellor there now is focused on Pullman operations, working with our faculty and staff in Pullman, using the Ida Lou Anderson House for community gatherings and student gatherings and things like that. And Dave, shows up at all of the recruitment events and is there as, you know, preaching about why you need to come to WSU Pullman and why that's important. And it's allowed Chris and myself and others to be out doing some of the other things that we need to be doing. So to me, I sort of say version 1 didn't work, but version 2 seems to be going really, really well. We see lots of support from the Pullman community for that. Finally, ensure a more focused presence in major markets. We got to be in Seattle. We got to be in Northern California. We got to be in the Phoenix, you know, Arizona metro area. We have a lot of Cougs down there, and it's important that leadership is out and about where we have people. And then finally, enhance the depth and breadth of external partnerships. You know, we've got a great relationship with the Boeing company, with Avista, with other places. But as we go and extend that circle of influence out, there are a lot more places that have a lot of Cougs that want to continue to see us do a great job of producing that next generation workforce and want to be with us on what our graduates need to be regardless of campus location. So that's what I have. And I wasn't intended to be a 50-minute presentation. But what we want to do is if I go back to that first slide, let's cycle back to the 3 things that I mentioned. So what we would like to do is identify areas where the board desires more information related to MSU, WSU. What questions do you all have as you listen to your colleagues? What types of things are still out there? Or it could be things that you say, hey, I just don't agree with this, and that's fine too. We need to know that and work together on those things. So I want to open it up for discussion, and actually what I'd like to do is actually go around to each of you and hear your responses, not just the presentation, but where are you with the One WSU initiative and what types of things are you hearing out there that you think are really important that we think about. So, and with that, I'm going to ask Judy to start. And I'm just going to work our way around this direction. And Lisa, you can watch our timing. We want to have lots of time for this. So I'll start with you. And then after everybody goes, we can just have an open discussion. So
I agree with you on the moving international programs and, I applaud moving EP research, EP international programs, some of those things back into the academic realm of the house. I think that has resonated well with faculty. I think the Pullman Chancellor issue is still being debated and depends where you are when listening to who, whether it's a good idea. I will say I was talking to people downtown and they love it. They love Dave in that position. They love that they get to go to coffee at Island Terrace. I think I agree with re-envisioning and reselling it as a different position than what we originally started is going pretty well. There's still a lot of tension of where the academic house sits on all the campuses with our BCAAs and whose decision-making powers where. And I think you're right, we're not gonna solve that, but we'll get better at it.
anything else?
What I would say just came to mind for me is, you know, when you're talking about the relationships between administration on the different campuses, you know, I think it's really important that as a system, we're working together and we're not individual campuses. And the attitude of the administration is reflected all the way down the system. And so I think when there is tension between the campuses, the students feel that as well. And I think it's really easy to compare the different campuses to one another when you're a student. Well, this campus gets that and we get this, and you know, why is that? And so, you know, I think, like you said, that might never totally disappear, but I just think it's really important in our messaging and in the way that One WSU evolves. We're always keeping that top of mind. Not that that's not happening right now, but I just think from the student perspective, it's really important that we all remember we're all part of the system together and it's not a competition. And I'm sure I'll have more thoughts as, you know, we go around the room and people bring up other things, but that was just kind of what came to mind for me.
Doug?
You know, seeing that timeline underscores your point about, you know, this has really not been around that long. You know, 1890, and then in a short period of time, 25 years, right? And so it's dynamic, it's changing as we go. I think to add these, just again, in that context of time, to add these campuses beyond Pullman was brilliant. I think that's one of our big strengths. And the one WSU I see as a mark, I see as a brand, I see as a representation of that. And maybe my question would be, like in these listening sessions, how much of a force or how much, I mean, you know, some of us, looking at Enrique, we went to school at WSU way back when, in the mid-70s. And WSU was synonymous with Pullman. It's just Pullman. You go to Pullman and you have that experience, and it's transformational in a very formidable time of your life. And now that's not the case. Yet I would venture to say 85% of the, all things aren't equal, that Pullman remains the core, the epicenter, the flagship. And so there's going to be some, these kinds of questions that we're talking about. What I don't know with those listening sessions is there, how much tension is there from those who only experience, or especially I'm thinking about some who've just been in Pullman for a long time. We have long tenured employees and who might resist this expansion into what I would say is more representative of land grant university with these multiple campuses. I don't have a good sense of that.
I think it depends. You are talking about an existential change to a university structure over a relatively short period of time. And how a large group of individuals is going to react to that is going to be varied, right? I think we've done a much better job recently at talking about how, whether I'm talking about Tri-Cities or Everett or Vancouver or Spokane or our extension apparatus, broadly speaking, et cetera, how in the long term, this will actually be a significant value add to Pullman. And that narrative is really important to there is a fundamental limit to how impactful WSU can be as a single campus. When I was at the University of Missouri, we experienced that. There was only so much one physical location could do. I think it's easy to jump to, well, we'll do multiple locations, we'll have all this and all that kind of stuff, but driving that question back to what does it mean with enhanced research, with enhanced student experience, or Pullman specifically, we need to drive that narrative over and over and over again. And so I think we've been more successful in giving very tangible examples of how that works. So just being overly simplistic, a student who is 2 years in Pullman and decided it's not the best location, but Vancouver would be great. We don't lose that student, right? We don't lose a kook in that process. And so the more we speak to this, and not just say, well, it's great and, pandering, but have legitimate conversations. I mean, you every college and having these conversations and ask the questions. And having that narrative go back and forth, I think, is really essential. But that's going to take time, and I think that aspect of it we're engaging in. But it's going to take a long time to get that really built in. I also think we have to be very comfortable understanding there will be a percentage of people that just don't want change, and we have to have the conversation that we're going to be okay. Not simply stopping because we can't get 100% of people to agree to X, Y, and Z. And, that is a reality with any sort of large scale institutional change, organizational change. And, so that's okay. But if the idea is that everybody agrees on everything, well, you'll go 100. So, without making these changes, we've got to be comfortable with X%. Not necessarily agree. Yeah.
Yes, so I have had the benefit of being part of a lot of one initiatives in corporate world. Whether it was one United Technology, one Honeywell, one Boeing. And today I still currently serve the top 5,100 corporations in the world. to help ready C-suite candidates who are on succession plans. So just with that backdrop, when I first heard of One WSU, it was a transformation, right? People, process, and tools. And the piece that I felt I wasn't quite sure I was still grasping was what was the culture that we were trying to really make sure was resilient. And I love what Regent Vogel said, because the culture of people working together to fiercely transform the lives of our students or the world, or whatever, context you want to put it in. I just would like us to think a little bit about that, because it's not what we say, it's not what we do, it's the operational stuff. At the end of the day, we can't get everybody to agree, but there are a lot of people right now that seem to feel pain. And so I'm not sure I understand that, whether it's the faculty who can't get laptops, or, are the students who still have a great amount of need. I'm not sure I'm connecting the dots on, how we address closing that gap where everybody feels like they're fiercely involved in, moving forward together, so focused on the future instead of ourselves, right? And so I've seen that in a lot of places. And what's really interesting, so the word adaptability, the word resilience, we're doing this so that the institution can move forward together. I've seen a lot of lessons learned, and the lessons learned on this is the people side, and it's all people, not just the students or the faculty and staff. And so I guess more on the people and culture would be helpful going forward,
That's good. Yeah, please.
I really appreciate this presentation, and most importantly, the space for us to have a dialogue about this. I think to Jen's point, this is a transformation we are undertaking, and it's about people and change management, just like the implementation of Workday, which was not done without strategic thought and overnight. And so we have to allow people to change and to adapt and to have clear understanding. And so I think One WSU has been seen sometimes as a tagline, a brand, a marketing, and instead I think it's the way in which we work together. And so the more that we can continue to perpetuate that commitment, which to me is in essence living out our land grant mission. And so I've always felt like when we talk about this, 100% the concept is activating our mission in the way we work to serve our students. And when I think of my professional background is almost opposite Jen's, small and scrappy. And so when I think about, the way in which from a private industry perspective, One WSU can be of true benefit, it is meeting community where they are. And every single campus represents a different community. And we're serving our communities by being in those places, operating a little differently. We don't take Pullman and say Pullman is Vancouver or Tri-Cities or Everett. And that is really, truly One WSU, one land grant mission. And so where I think that this dialogue is so incredibly helpful is when we start to use it as a lens to make good decisions. And I continue to say that it is not additive when we think about the ways in which we're going to meet industry where they are, or we're going to implement innovation. It is also a recognition of, and I think you mentioned, potential redundancies that are necessary and some that are not necessary. And so in my world, if you can't meet the budget and you're not profitable, something gets cut. Not something gets added without a cut. And so I've said this in other meetings, but I'm looking for us to utilize the benefits of One WSU to help us feel empowered to say no to some things. And I know that takes time, but I also think that if we're helping people to be part of the why, the land grant mission, which we are, and we're talking about today, then that kind of change is possible. So continue to appreciate the four of you and all of the other members of the leadership team that are advancing one WSU, because I continue to believe it is why we're here and what we need to do to move forward as a competitive university.
So I like 2.0 a lot. I think that, what I would say thank you to, you and your leadership team is that I think you responded to, hey, we got to change the narrative on this a bit. And again, you know, we come at this, some of us do, from such a different kind of space of being on the private sector side of things. And I too have been involved in a lot of one type stuff. One thought I have is, you know, I see this as kind of the governance model or the backbone for which Washington State University as an institution moves into the future around being a responsive and really a relevant institution. And you do that through the strengths of land grant, dispersed geographically. The single accreditation to me is just a story that WSU should be amplifying a bazillion times, that you get to be a COOG from Vancouver, Tri-Cities, Everett, what that means, and Spokane and Pullman too. So it also, I believe, is the foundation for which the new leader catapults from, right? And if I am a new leader coming into an institution of this size and complexity, I am 100% thankful that there is a governance model, a backbone in which I can rely upon in how we have agreed to go forward. One thought, and something we have done and do every single quarter on our one plan, because I'm a $7 billion institution with 57 locations, from Joseph, Oregon to Hermiston to Spokane, and, you know, representing 1,200 people. And they all have their issues and their opinions of the mothership and what is getting pushed out. And there is this interesting balance that I think WSU has to continue to navigate, which is transparency, but also accountability and entitlement. And just because you're a faculty member of WSU or that you are on XYZ campus does not mean that you always get a say in how the mothership and institution gets run, but this helps create governance for the way in which we want to operate and engage our folks. But there is a balance there, right? So I would love to see one WSU, because it's not a slogan, create like some kind of interactive mechanism of a pulse survey that perhaps is going out to those once a quarter, maybe it's twice a year. It's not asking permission or feedback of, do you like this? We don't care at this point, right? This is the foundation for which we're operating from. But it's more of, how are we doing? What areas are we missing right now? Are you still struggling with kind of are we still hot on the tension side? What are some of the things that you might recommend we could be doing? How are you feeling about our geographical distribution? Are there spots that we're missing? But just keeping a pulse on that and allowing people the opportunity to give input in a very concise manner. You're not looking for a bazillion word summary, but check their pulse all the time. So they start to feel like, hey, yeah, I can have a touch point back to this thing and I am starting to invest in it, even if I don't realize it through this mechanism. So that would be my kind of, when you're trying to look at people and culture, just how you might try to create a more interactive, consistent way in which people have some touch point to one WSU.
Okay, so I come at this from probably a little bit different perspective from many of you, because I came out to Washington State in 2000. So it was, you know, about 10, 11 years after the original branch campuses were started. And of course, as I think some of you know, maybe not all of you, when they were started, that wasn't as 4 years, they were 2 years, very much in the same type of structure that Everett is currently in, so that it was a 2+2. You go to the community college for the first 2, and then you switch over. When the revision was done in 2004, that was when, of course, there was the option of moving these campuses to a 4-year. And I went through that process, in the Tri-Cities, with the Tri-Cities campus. And it was pretty arduous because, in fact, at one point, Gregoire told us to get our act together. We were never gonna be a 4-year. And so we had quite a joint powwow because the WSU had a different view of it in the community. But then we ultimately got together. I would say that since then, I mean, there's been a great evolution, and Kirk, honestly, you started it with your first tour as a brand new president. And I remember, I think it was Everett, but I'm not 100% sure, where somebody asked you, well, they got up and started a thing about, well, what about branch campuses? And you very calmly said, we're not calling them branch campuses anymore. They are our campuses. And that set the tone tremendously for what was to come. And so, I mean, as I've just looked at it over the years, as we've continued to evolve this, it really it's like anything, any big change, roles and responsibilities get in the way. And people don't understand whose role, whose responsibility. And then you throw in the fact that this is also, it means more dollars for over here, but less for me, or back and forth. So that's always a complication, as our, and occasionally, tenure, who grants tenure, who can get tenure, it gets a little bit thorny, but, I think these are all things that can be worked out, and I've seen a great transition, over time. So I think, we will continue to evolve this. I really like this presentation. I think things are going the right way. I think there's still a lot of confusion. I mean, one of the things that we really did hear clearly, even amongst those who were at a pretty high leadership level, is they don't understand it. So, I mean, communication, I think, is one of the hardest things you do in any organization effectively. So there's not a strong understanding. I think part of it was, you brought in the Drive to 25, which we were focused on very strongly, and all of a sudden, then one WSU came up and people were trying to figure out, well, are they related? And they really aren't related. They're looking at different things. So I think there's a little confusion there. But, culturally, it's been mentioned a few times, that's going to be a challenge in the future. But I really do agree that, as it was what Lisa said, I mean, it's part of our land grant mission. We can bring much greater value to our state and beyond if we can get this right. And we're all working together, because there's a lot of power in that. And so I'm a strong believer in one WSU, and even though my time at the board is growing short, I will be continuing to follow, because I just think it's the right thing for WSU to do.
I think you got a communication problem, because, I mean, if we're still wondering what one WSU is, which seems to be the case, a lot of people have a lot of confusion, either not telling the story right or well, or you're not telling it all. So I think, as a storyteller, what is this, and what are we trying to communicate with it? We just did these videos about what's the role of the region, and and that really came about from the fact that every time we talk to students, they would say, "What's a region?" And then we have to explain all that. Which I think actually those videos do a pretty good job of explaining that, basically. And in our society today, I think you have to, you need to produce a video that gets to the point. And, that I think would help people understand, and even your own staff and faculty, because they seem to be like, okay, I'm not quite sure. I mean, the concept of it to me is kind of a no-brainer, because it's all about, the issue, everybody being on together here. I heard a number of little taglines that you could have here. One issue, one land grant mission. You get to be a Coug from Pullman to Everett to Vancouver, and you should be able to tell this in a minute, and that people can look at it, see it, and then, okay, I get it. Knowing that it's going to be something that's going to be have to be updated and all of that, but at least I think right now I still don't think people really understand it. And I agree with you, I just don't think that there's that confusion. Somehow we need to make this pretty understandable and to the point. And understanding too, that not everybody's gonna love it, not everybody's gonna go along with it, but at least explain what is it that we want to accomplish, why it's good, why it's important, and why we need it. So I would just say, sit down and really think about that. Frankly, this has really kind of been the first that I've kind of had a good explanation of what it is. And, I mean, I've kind of understood it, but I think this is good. But, I've been on the board since March of 2020. And so it seems like I should have known that a long time ago. So that's what I would say. Tell a story and let's get to the board.
We're gonna see, yeah.
Regent Blankenship, Brett?
He might not be in a place to be able to provide.
Oh.
But- oh, there he is.
I apologize, the audio link makes it difficult to hear much. But I can echo a few of the things I picked up. One of the more intriguing is both Jan and Marty's comments from the corporate model. I find it troubling to focus mostly on one WSU as a slogan or a campaign when we've always been a system. And trying to repeat one WSU over and over doesn't make it more of a system than it ever was. So I think as we reflect on that, I don't have to hear a campaign of we're one Boeing. Someone works at Boeing, they work at Boeing. It doesn't matter if they're in Kansas or Seattle or Chicago or somewhere else. And same thing at the credit union. It's all about relationships, I think. And our goal is to educate young people and prepare them for successful lives. So that needs to be our focus, not necessarily getting defensive over whether something is called a branch campus or not. I mean, we have a flagship campus that we have to be stewards of, and we have other campuses and regions that meet students' special needs in those areas, and we should embrace that and build on our successes. So I appreciate the opportunity to continue to have the discussion, but I like to see us be open to things that, if they haven't been working well, to actually fess up to that and be open to changes that aren't working well, and not be criticized because you're just being honest that if it isn't working well, that's an observation, not that you're resistant to change. It's too easy to say, well, you're just an old dinosaur and you don't want change. We can drill down on some of those subtleties at a more appropriate time, but I appreciate the discussion. Thank you for putting it on the agenda.
Miss Daryl, our folks up here just to give some thoughts, and let's just at least open it up for anything else. And I would say that what I would propose to do is sort of do a summary of this discussion that I've pushed back out to the board. some of the different things that you all have suggested as concrete steps that we could look at taking to continue to sort of advance this forward. So anyway, Daryl.
So educationally or serving, as a faculty member, I've been at 3 other land grant institutions. What I think draws a lot of us here and keeps us here is the fact that we believe in this one WSU mission, the statewide mission. If you look across our nation, you're not going to see this type of a structure in other states. This is really unique. And it provides an opportunity for impact that I think we need to embrace, and we need to really communicate clearly that we don't have to compare ourselves to other organizations. We have to just say, we have a statewide presence, we have great campuses. We also, as Leslie pointed out, we probably should have put in here global campus as well. And that's a discussion point, I know, but that was part of our evolution. So coming back to the point, I think for the leader coming in, as I think Marty, you said, this is a great launch point for that leader to come in, because this is a structure that is about a large organization, very complex, lots of challenges, but we're trying to achieve common goals. And that's what's attractive. I'm not going to say anymore, I'll hand it over to colleagues, but if you listen to Chris, he's got very fresh experience in this. Leslie's got very fresh experience in this, but I've been in the system for a while, and it's what keeps us here.
So yes, I do have experience with the system that it operates very, very differently from what the intent of one WSU is. The University of South Carolina system is 8 institutions, 6 of which are separately accredited. There's 2 medical schools that are separately accredited, and there's different 4-year institutions, so much so that there are different athletic teams, different logos, different mascots. So it's frankly a confederation of institutions and not a system that works and cooperates, even though there were system officers. I was one of those. This has so much more promise than that. There is a competitiveness for sure. The campuses are going to be naturally different. I think the way that we respect the campuses, they're not branches. In South Carolina, we actually called some of them twigs of branches, if that could not be more dismissive of what the intent was of those institutions. So there are challenges and the promise is there, but I think Regent Ramus, you said the thing that I haven't heard yet in the discussion that I think is there that people haven't acknowledged. There is a sense of loss. There is a sense in some ways that Pullman has lost something because of the strength of the other campuses. And I think if we don't address that in terms of perception, in terms of budget, in terms of all of that, we're not ever going to resolve this, because that is real. I have seen that. And I have the experience of doing both at the Pullman campus and at the Spokane campus. And I feel that. And we have to address that, is especially in terms of budget and accountability, because there is a sense that the other campuses cost, and what is that? And we really need to be clear and transparent about what that is and what it means.
So 2 or 3 thoughts. So I think at the 10,000 foot level, you will get people to agree on the conceptual direction of what we are trying to do. It is extraordinarily unique, and that's hard. That's hard. You can't overstate that enough. That when people come into this system externally, that there is no other replication of this. What we're trying to do is fundamentally different, and so, you know, that's going to be hard for people externally or internally to think about, because there's not a simple model to look off. If you talk about in corporate entities, a lot of different versions do one this. In higher ed, none do. Like this is it. It's the right approach. It's all those things. But I think like the campuses, in saying after 35 years, they should be as fully developed and understood as a 150 or 170-year-old university. We might be making the same mistake with our discussion about the system. And I both mean this in terms of kind of the existential piece of loss at you know, but also just the day-to-day details of it. There are a lot of substantial challenges with what we're trying to do. Right? I'm the provost of 6 campuses. That doesn't exist anywhere else in the United States. I was sitting in a room with a bunch of provosts. One of them was the Albany provost, one was the SUNY Binghamton provost, and one of them was the system provost. 3 separate provosts, 3 separate jobs. So, you know, we're going down a path that is going to take more than 2, 3, 4 years to instrumentize and proceduralize. And I agree with your point of a short video, but that's the 10,000 foot. It's the details on, okay, how do department chairs work with VCAs, work with deans, work with the provost, work with, you know, it's those things that are going to have to develop over time. And if I'm going to be blunt, you know, we also have an assumption that every leader in the organization over the past 3 or 4 years has been fully committed to this mission and not in some ways, shape or form jockeying for a different version than what currently exists. And I think if you get all of us together and all the chancellors together and all the deans together, you know, I think you'd get a different story. I think we are in an interesting place right now. We have a team of deans right now who get this. They get that to build engineering, the future at Tri-Cities, Everett, Vancouver are utterly essential for the long-term goals. I don't know that that was true 5 years ago. No. And so it's, you know, we've got to get every layer of this figured out so that when we are communicating, it's not us communicating this and the deans communicating this and the chairs communicating this, but there is that common vision. And there's a tremendous amount of work on the instrumentation proceduralization of this so that it actually makes sense from top to bottom. So I think we're at an incredible point. I think we've done a lot of the legwork, but I do, like with a lot of these things here, it seems like we think we ought to be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. We can have the med school conversation. It's the same conversation versus respecting how long this takes to develop. We were at Everett yesterday and we talk about where is Everett today? Well, where was Pullman in 1899? Right? I mean, I think Everett has developed pretty darn well in 9 years. If we look at the transition and the development of Pullman in its first 9 years. So putting this in some scale, understanding the complexity, all different pieces is, you know, it's a long-term challenge. And I don't want to shooting ourselves in the foot by thinking we ought to be somewhere where it's not realistic we could be. I think we're pretty darn well off considering how new this all is and how utterly unique and different it is than everywhere else.
I think there's an element of, we're trying to grow the whole pie, not divide it. And just the circumstances, it appears that we've diluted our resources across multiple locations. And just to be able to say that directly and bluntly is that's what people feel. But, you know, we're really trying to put in place a way to operationalize growing the whole pie.
Yes.
And, you know, I think all the rigor that needs to go into that will help allay the fears of, you know, division and loss.
Well, for the first time, we had the CFO sitting with the department chairs, diving into the core budget and talking about the specifics of some of these conversations in an open discussion, which we will do again and again and again, right? Like those are some of the details because sometimes when we're investing in a place, it is true that that has an implication on the rest of the university. Other times people think money's being diverted and it's not actually being diverted. That if you don't have the student tuition from the individuals on these different places, then it doesn't exist. So the idea that if you didn't have X, we would still have the same amount of money to do all of these things is unclear. So I think a lot of that actual acculturation needs to occur. And then the secondary piece, I'm thinking of this as an overly simplistic leadership example. You have leaders who believe that if they're not getting the credit, something bad is happening. And you've got other ones who believe if everybody else gets the credit, it's going to work out okay for the overall leader. There's the same construct here that we need to develop a shared faith that the success of Everett, Tri-Cities, Vancouver, Spokane, Pullman, Global, leads to a greater sum. And every part of that unit will share in that success, both from a brand reputation standpoint, from an overall impact standpoint, from simply being in a better place to work that can do more things. That mentality is hard to grow in organizations, right? People tend to focus, and we do have leadership work to do to get all of our leaders understanding that when I enter, right? You're 51% the leader of your unit, you're 49% a WSU leader. And that shift, you know, honestly, if you just got one campus, you've got the same thing, right? It's college on college crime, not campus on campus. But that shift, that takes time, and that takes a commitment to that shared vision. And I think we're on that path.
Well,
That's
and
hard
I
work.
would say, I really appreciate the devil's in the detail of what you're saying. And again, being part of complex institutions, I think there is no end game. Like, this thing just actually, you're not gonna get to a place that instrumentally and procedurally you can check the box and say, we're good to go. This is a journey that will evolve and take shape and look very different in 3 years. And again, it's gonna be different in 5 years. But without having a backbone construct, and if you if you stayed the same and allowed independence, if you will, like complete autonomy and no kind of unification, and WSU continues to grow, we're just going to be so fragmented. So this is about survival as well. And again, responsive and relevant to what we heard this morning around core and careers, and because that's what we're here for. We're here to educate students. We're not here at the end of the day to be creating, you know, my own little fiefdom, right? So, but this thing doesn't have an end game other than evolution and being prepared to evolve and navigate. So again, that's where I think maybe how you help leaders transition with this is, you know, we're trying to create a pathway for the future here for all of us. And we're raising one giant boat, and there's many paddles in the water. And we're going to have leaders who can't make the journey. And I mean, those are, and you will have faculty that can't make it, and administration. And that's the hard part that, again, rubber kind of meets the road around accountability on. You only get to kind of keep paddling the wrong direction for so long. And this governance model kind of shines the light on that. If you're on a rowing team and you're taking a quick break, someone's gonna know. So I really appreciate, Chris, what you are saying, and we hear you, but that's part of the rigor in leading a complex institution, is consistently having to figure out the procedural processes that are gonna get you through the next 18 months, and then respond and be resilient to what's coming at you, you know, in 3 years.
One element that I'm thinking about in terms of your rowing analogy, that I think we all know that, you know, if you put the whole team on a big rowboat, there's a third of the team that's rowing, a third that's sitting there, you know, kind of watching to see whether or not this thing's really gonna move forward. And then a third that are actively, you know, rowing the opposite direction. And so I think that we have to recognize that change management element. And Kirk, I'm curious about, you've made the comment about sometimes we say, we don't understand when maybe we are actively rowing against. And I quote you all the time about that, because I think all organizations have that same dynamic. All organizations have folks actively rowing and actively rowing the opposite direction. My curiosity is around your thoughts relative to sense of urgency. So when you think about trying to change hearts and minds and getting folks involved in it, you have to kind of have a reason why. And there has to be a sense of urgency. And in my mind, I think it's very clear survival as a university means we have to do things differently. And I think that really this organizational structure shift in 2020 was about that vision. And so, Kirk, I just want to make sure there's a little bit of space for you to maybe speak a bit about why we're doing this now and why we would not want to wait. So what are your thoughts around kind of the urgency of the implementation of one WSU in 2020? I mean, we were talking about it in 2020, so.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting, if you look at university presidencies as a whole and you put people in these buckets. I've worked for a couple of people that I think after 5 years, you'd say, well, they collected a paycheck and they were, at this, or they didn't really do anything. They didn't move the institution. And I'm not arguing that's necessarily bad. You've got another set of folks that tend to try new things and push the envelope sometimes on change, but that can also frustrate people just as much because they're like, boy, there's no steadiness here. And trying to balance those out. And to me, we have to be, and I know people on the board will be shocked, we've got to be slow and steady. And I think it's easy to just say, let's jump to this because we kind of feel that we've got this particular moment in time. Where I think the mistake would be if we 3 years from now look back and say, well, we kind of just lost that altogether. We've made some tough choices. We need to continue to move down the road. And I think I go back to Brett's comment. We're going to have, like I mentioned with the Pullman Chancellor version 1 versus version 2. I think we just have to admit as leaders sometimes say, that just didn't work. And so we're going to go back and try something different. And that will frustrate some people sometimes because they're like, well, hell, if you can't do better than that, maybe we need somebody else. But I think if we set up an environment to say this is complex, we can't just go duplicate what anybody else has done, nor should we. We have to give ourselves the grace to say, occasionally we're going to take a step in the wrong direction. And we need as leaders to be able to say, we took a step in the wrong direction, let's step back and try something different. And I think as long as we continue to do that, we'll be fine.
I was gonna tell you, in our organization, you are required as a department or a business unit, you have to go through our reorganization, alignment, and evaluation every 24 months to ensure that you're aligned with the direction of our one STCU initiative, but that your alignment of how you're using your resources and your headcount is aligned the same way. So accountability and then a transparency, that as a leader, I don't love having to do that every 24 months, but I understand why I have to because things keep changing. And me trying to kind of hold on to it the way I think needs to happen, I don't get that privilege because I'm part of an overall entity, not a silo.
I want to make sure that we're utilizing the board's time. And this is not meant to be the only discussion, but I just felt after some other meetings that people didn't understand or had concerns. And I don't want to say like we've checked all the boxes and solved them all, but I will put together a summary that we'll shoot back out to the board to say, here's some of the things that we heard. And that allows us to make sure we're sort of working on the people side. I like the idea of some pulse surveying, communications, those pieces I think are really important. I don't want to minimize too a little bit of what Chris mentioned around leaders who are coming in. New leaders that come into WSU, as far as they're concerned, has practically always been this way. And we tend to forget when you were at point A, now we're at point B, and you were on that journey, you've seen the whole thing. If I come in at point B, it's like, well, it could be 1950, it was structured that way. It doesn't matter. That's been the way it was. And we're seeing this with some of our new deans that are coming in. I think as we have an opportunity for new chancellors, they come in and sort of say, oh, the leadership, the way it's structured, isn't that the way it's always been? People will tell them it hasn't. But I do think people come in and we're seeing with some of the new leaders, they roll up their sleeves and get after it. I give Judy a lot of credit. I remember our first couple of years of doing some of this. We didn't call it 1WSU at the time, but I remember questions about, are we going to have a different kind of faculty governance and faculty senate? Because the faculty senate was like, 100% Pullman. Each campus had like one representative. If you look at our faculty senate and faculty governance today, the committees all have representatives from across the system. It morphed and evolved that way in a really positive direction. And so there's things that don't appear on any org chart that we have moved and morphed. And I really believe if we said, let's go back to the way it was before, I think we have a lot of people push back and say, no, we like what we're doing. So
in fact, we've got so far in that direction that when we tried to say the Senate should be in person, it got voted down. We stayed on Zoom.
Well, your chair is
Smoking
from
chair.
Vancouver and is from a
Our chair
program that
elect is from.
from
Spokane.
Spokane, yeah.
Yeah.
These are things that would have been almost
Well, you're right.
unheard of in 2017, 2018.
The change in who has voice has, and we've also guaranteed voice to the career track, which was not happening when I came in as.
Which is a whole shift. Please, one of your point. With all of the stuff out there about higher ed and it being, it not changing and not adapting to the future and not really meeting the people where they need to be and all of these things and too much bloat. So in that system, all of those accreditation teams, all of those teams, all those things, we need to be more aggressive about what we're doing and how that differentiates us from higher education and this national narrative, and how we are the counter example of what is existing out there and exactly what people say they want to see universities doing. I mean, we need to own the difference as an advantage here versus as something that's weird or something like that. Coming from external, this was such an attractive component that I mean, there is a little bit of, I'm like, we're really arguing. I mean, we're really doing this. It is so attractive from external. I'm not sure we get, if you're at a place that's landlocked with a bunch of other universities out there and you got provosts arguing with each other and all this stuff over just dumb stuff, what IT platform you're using or whatever. You come here, it's such a different vision. And there's something there with that national narrative and us as a counterexample that.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
message. And you're right, we just see this as an asset. Like, do you know that this is so unique and it is so worthwhile and it is the right path? I mean, to tell our, those who have maybe been, we've been doing it this way and now this system is in fact a best practice.
Yeah, if I could add to that, Doug, we're community-based in a way that no other organization does. We're community committed. We're a neural network across the state. We need to claim that because that means we're community accountable. Our campuses are community engaged.
It's a land grant mission that you're describing. I mean, we're really, a modern land grant message.
We had only one.
But it does go back to communication internally and externally and being strategic and effective in storytelling to your stakeholders internally, and then figuring out how you package this to make it effective. And I really, you'll see, but I think the Here We Go campaign, that's not a Tolman thing. That should be 100% mandated that every single campus is using Here We Go. And by the way, no other campaign, because the schizophrenia from a marketing guru is like, it's ridiculous that we have different things. And that's where one WSU can actually play a really good part in this, is that Daryl's campus is about Here We Go for, our healthcare side. Sandra's is Here We Go around the ingenuity and amazing innovation happening in the Tri-Cities. Vancouver's is about this experience that students can have. Everett's, all of it, but Here We Go, we've got to figure out how to get way more consistent and way tighter on our storytelling. Because again, you got a lot of oars in the water and it feels like, is WSU Tri-Cities different than WSU Pullman? So it does go back again to some strategy around your marketing and communication work as well.
I just wanna, maybe, it's healthy to look at our blind spots also. Because we could be too inward, and change does take a long time. But I do feel a sense of urgency around survivability, because the swirl outside of us, up and out. And when we look at universities closing, mergers and acquisitions, divestments, that dynamic is real. So we're gonna face into reality as we go through, the continued change, and just the positive energy is helpful. But I do feel a sense of urgency as well. I was feeling a little unsettled about long change. I just think facing into reality is part of up and out, looking up and out, so.
Any other comments or feedback from the board? This was awesome and really, really well done in terms of slides and interaction and dialogue. So thank you very much for responding to the need for us to all make sure that we are committed and moving forward as one leadership team to implement one WSU. All right, okay. So that is the last element of the Executive and Governance Committee before we break for lunch. So at this time, I will go ahead and let folks know that we will resume at about 1:30 to reconvene the Executive and Governance Committee. Thank you.